Now faith is confidence. Chapter and what we hope for. And assurance about. Now faith is confidence we do not see. And what we hope for. And assurance what about the ancients were commended for. We do not see. By faith we understand this is what the ancient universe were commended for at God's command. By faith we understand what is seen that the universe was formed at God's command. By faith, so that what is seen brought God was not made out of what was visible. By faith, Abel brought God a better offering than Cain did as righteous. By God spoke well of his offering. He was commended as righteous. Abel still speaks when God spoke well even though he is dead. And by faith, Abel still was taken from this life. Even though so that he did not experience that. By faith, he could not be found was taken from his life. Him away. So that he did not experience that. He was committed. He could not be found because God had taken him away. And without faith, for before he was taken, it is impossible. He was committed as one who pleased God. Because anyone who comes to him must impossible to please God. And that because anyone who comes to him who honestly must believe that he is this by faith, and that he rewards those about things not yet seen. And holy by faith, built in Noah wind warned to save his about things not yet seen. By his faith and holy fear, he condemned built in the world to save his family. Became heir of the by his faith. He condemned keeping the world and became heir of the righteousness. When that is in keeping with faith. He would let him receive by faith his inheritance. Abraham obeyed to go to a place, even though he would let him receive where he was his inheritance. By obeying it, he made his even though he did not know where he was going, like a stranger in a foreign country. He lived and made his home as in the promised land, like a stranger in a foreign country. Of the same, he lived in tents, as he was Isaac and Jacob, to the city who were heirs with him. Of the same architect and builder is God. For he was looking forward to the city with foundations. Who was past whose architect and builder is God. Was unable to bear children. Even Sarah, because she considered who was past childbearing age, who had made the promise, was unable to bear children. And so, because she considered him faithful, and he who had made the promise, and so from this one man, numerous as the stars, and he as good as dead. And as countless as the sand of the seashore, numerous as the stars in the people were still living by as countless as the sand of the seashore. They did all not. These people were still living by faith that things promised. When they died, they did not and received from the things promised, admitting that they only saw them and strangers and welcomed them from a distance. People who said such things that they were foreigners and strangers on a country of their own. People who say such things of the country show that they are looking for a country of their own. To return. If they have been thinking of the country they had a better country, they would have had an opportunity to return. Therefore, instead, they were looking for a better country. For he has prepared a city for them. Therefore, God is not ashamed to be called their God. Abraham, for he has prepared a city for Isaac as a sacrifice. By faith, he who had embraced the promises, when God tested him, was about to Isaac as a sacrifice, his one and only son. He who had embraced the promises, had said to him, was about to sacrifice his one and only son. Your offspring will be reckoned. Even though God had said to him, it is through Isaac that your offspring will be reckoned. And so in a manner of speaking, Abraham reasoned that God could even raise the dead. And so in a manner of speaking, by faith, he did receive Isaac back from death and Esau in regard to their future. By faith, Isaac blessed Jacob. He was dying. And Esau in regard to their Joseph's sons. By worship as he Jacob on the top, he was dying. Bless each of Joseph's sons. By worship as he was on the top when his end was near. Spoke about Exodus. By Israelites from Joseph. And when his end was near, spoke about Exodus. of the Israelites from Egypt, Moses' parents, and gave instructions concerning the burial of his bones after he was born. By faith, because it saw Moses' parents, he was no ordinary child. For 3 months afraid after he was born, because it saw he was no ordinary child. And Moses, they were not afraid when he had grown up, refused to be known as the son of Pharaoh's daughter. Moses, when he had grown up, to be mistreated, refused to be known as the son of Pharaoh's daughter. Rather than to enjoy the fleeting pleasures, he chose to be mistreated. He regarded with the people for the sake of God, rather than to enjoy the fleeting pleasures and the treasure of Egypt. He regarded disgrace for the sake of Christ, by faith, as of greater value than the treasure of Egypt, not fearing the king's because he was looking ahead to his reward. By faith, he persevered, not fearing the king's because anger. He saw him who is invisible. He persevered because he saw him who is invisible in the application of blood. By faith, so that the destroyer Passover of the firstborn in the application of blood touch the firstborn of Israel. So that the destroyer by faith of the firstborn, the people passed would not touch the firstborn of Israel as on dry land. By faith, but when the Egyptians, the people passed through the Red Sea, they were on dry land. But when the Egyptians, the walls of Jericho fell, they were after the army had marched around them for 7 days. By faith, the walls of Jericho fell. The prostitute, after the army had marched around them for 7 days, was by faith with those the prostitute disobedient, because she welcomed the spies. And what more shall I say? Was not killed with those who were disobedient. I do not have time to tell about Gideon. And what more shall I say? Barak. I do not have time to tell about Gideon. Jephthah. About David. Barak and Samuel. Samson and the prophets. Jephthah. Who through faith about David kingdom and Samuel. Administered justice and the prophets. And gained what was promised. Who through faith. Who shut the mouth kingdom. Alliance. Administered justice, the fury of the flame, and gained what was escaped the edge of the sword. Who shut the mouth weakness alliance, quenched the fury of the flame, and escaped the edge of the powerful in battle. Whose weakness and routed was turned to strength. And who became powerful in battle. Women received and routed dead, raised to life again. Armories. There were others. Women received back their dead, refusing to raise to life again, so that they might gain an even better resurrection. Refusing to be released, face jeers of so that they might gain an even better resurrection. There were some face jeers of fighting, and even chains in imprisonment. They were killed. They were put to death by stoning. They went about. They were sold in sheepskins and goat skins. They were killed by the sword. Destitute. Persecuted. They went about and mistreated in sheepskin. The world was not worthy of them. Destitute. They wandered in persecuted mountains and mistreated. Living in caves. The world was not worthy of them. They wandered in deserts and mountains. Commended. Living in caves and in holes in the ground. What had been these were all since God commended for their faith. Planned something better. Yet none of them received what had been promised. Together. Since God had planned something better for us, so that only together with us would they be made perfect.